Are you returning to work from parental leave or a professional wanting to propel your career? You will want to hear my conversation with this power couple who help people with these goals and a whole lot more. So, welcome, Lori and Jason, to the Future is Bright podcast. It's great to have you both on the show.
We are delighted to be here and delighted to be here together. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
Lori and Jason, let's start from the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about, Lori, your desire to be an attorney, and then Jason, your entree into business. If you guys can give us kind of a brief background on those things.
Sure. Well, we're joining you from Washington, D.C. today, which is a hub for many a lawyer, I think, in this world. And my desire to be a lawyer probably began with a desire to use language and words, and I love foreign languages and translating things into English, which, regulations can sort of be like foreign languages. I also had a desire as a younger child to be a doctor and really did not like the blood and guts aspect or the science and math aspect, so it was not exactly a fit. However, I wound up becoming a healthcare lawyer, so I do get to sort of have that itch scratched by being in the healthcare system. But, I get to do so in front of my laptop.
Very good. And Jason?
So I started in business in 7th grade when I realized that my classmates liked to eat Tic Tacs. And my mom and I would go to the grocery store, and I started buying Tic Tacs, and I had a Tic Tac resale business. And by the end of it, I had such a line at my locker that I was selling anywhere from 30 to 40 boxes of Tic Tacs a day. My social studies teacher saw what was going on, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm selling Tic Tacs." He's like, "All right, you're done." And the next morning, he also was in charge of the morning announcements. It was announced that the Tic Tac man was out of business. And so if you knew me in middle school and high school, I was the Tic Tac man. So I guess you could always say that I always found different entrepreneurial ways to bring either experiences or products to market. And as an attorney by marriage for 15 years, I've also had a link within the legal community. I babysat for a law firm partner when I was in high school, and she said, if you can get my kids to bed on time, then you can help with my files. And I was a file clerk at a very large New Jersey law firm.
Oh, fascinating.
So that intersection between business and law has always been there. And that's what I do in my speaking and training work with Ready, Set, Launch LLC.
Okay. So, Jason, I have to ask, did you take the Tic Tac business on the street and started peddling that way, or you were just done?
Well, I would start on the bus to school.
So
there were certain customers, and so I started bringing these paper bags with like Tic Tac, 3 packs of Tic Tacs. Orange was the most popular flavor by far. So orange was the first, and the white ones, and the green ones were like not as interesting.
And the regulatory lawyer in me is screaming, "Not for individual resale! Did you not read the box?"
Didn't matter. That's what everybody wanted.
Rule following, risk averse lawyer here with entrepreneurial spirit.
Such a great match. And it's worth kind of segueing into, how did you guys meet?
We met on September 11th, 2001 in the Loire Valley in France. I had just arrived. Of course, I'm from Pennsylvania and he's from New Jersey, and it took going to France for us to meet one another. But I had just arrived in the country a few days earlier to start a 1-year fellowship through the Rotary Foundation. And Jason here was the president of the Rotary Alumni Association in Paris and had planned a happy hour for September 11th to welcome all the new international scholars to the country. And so it was not exactly a happy hour, but we kept in touch ever since that date.
Yes. So I was the first non-French president of a French association, the Association des Boursiers de la Fondation de Rotary. It's all these French alums of the Rotary Scholarship, and we did these wonderful weekends in different parts of France with local Rotary groups.
That sounds amazing.
It was fantastic. The Champagne weekend, still rings in my head for so many good reasons. We had ski weekends in the Alps. So yeah, we met in France.
It sounds very romantic and extraordinary. Do you guys get back there often?
We've been back a few times together. Now, I will note we didn't start dating until we were both in DC, and I was in law school at Georgetown, and he was at business school at
Okay.
Georgetown. But we had been keeper in touchers throughout the couple of year period when we were living in different places. And we've been back to France. We went once or twice ourselves before we had
Okay.
children. And then we've been twice since we've had children. Once we had a little 8.5 month old with us, which was like the perfect age to take a child because they can't run around and wreak havoc yet. And then we went back. I was a partner at Denton's, and our global partner retreat was at Disney Paris in February a number of
Oh my
years ago.
goodness.
And so we said, well, it's Disney Paris. We know tons of people in Paris. We may as well. So we took the kids. They were 3 and 5. And we came back completely scarred and said, we are not taking them on an international trip for many, many, many more years. And we're planning to go next summer. So
Yes, and also if you were to call me while I'm driving, my Waze is set to
Is it
French.
really?
And her name,
her
yes,
name is
Veronique.
Yes.
Her name is Veronique, and so tourning à droite, tourning à gauche.
Oh my
So you will.
goodness.
So
Yeah.
yes, the French lives and alive and well every single day that we travel.
So fun. So you guys have kids?
We do. We have 2 wonderful redheaded boys. They are ages 10 and 12. They are in 5th and 7th
Okay.
grade. And they're very tween right now. There's a lot of Taylor Swift in
Oh
our
my.
house.
And
Yes.
anime or Roblox or things like that too? Or
Pokemon
oh, yep.
cards and Magic the
Mhm.
Gathering.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Very familiar with all those. And do they speak French as well? Are they learning?
Our oldest started taking French in middle
Okay.
school last year. So he's learning. He's got his little Duolingo account. And our younger son wants absolutely nothing to do
Alright.
with French because he wants to do something different from his brother and his parents, and he wants to learn Chinese.
That's awesome.
But most importantly, typically on Sunday nights, Lori has taught the boys her crepe recipe that she learned in France. So the boys will make a pizza crepe, and then they'll usually make a salmon crepe for us.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
So French culture, even if not the
Okay.
language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Good job. Good job, guys. So let's segue a little bit into um, so Jason, you've had your practice Ready Set Launch since 2011, and
Correct.
break it down a little bit for what you're doing. So speaker, trainer, coach. What are you doing? Who are your clients? What does that look like?
Sure. Well, it's funny. When I started my practice 12 years ago, I told my lovely wife that I was going to write a book, and it was going to be called Relationships to Infinity. And it only took me 10 years to actually write the book. All the while I was talking about writing the book, Lori actually wrote her book while she was just listening to me talk about my book. So for me, the speaking bucket really lands within working with law firms and professional services more broadly on business development strategies, tactics. You've just made partner, you've just made counsel. How do you think about going to market, in the practice that you're in, and just empowering that type of mindset for what is really a long-term approach. I also do career development programming about mentorship and sponsorship, and how do you grow within your organization. And then, really the foundation of Relationships to Infinity is the social science behind networks and how we think about our approach to connection and reconnection. Lori was just talking about the fact that we both are keeper and touchers, and there's actually a lot of social science behind that. So that's the speaking piece. And then the coaching piece is, okay, I want to go to the next level. I'm looking to make a transition. So law firms hired me, accounting firms, executive search firms hire me for those types of things.
And so do you tend to do one-on-one or in group? How does that tend to look when you say law firms hire you?
So it's a mix. So it could come as a cohort where folks are looking for a group environment to, be able to move along at a certain pace. And sometimes I'm added as an add-on for individuals that have just made partner or are partner and they need to be upskilled.
Okay.
So
So this story doesn't end. I mean, there's this part where Lori, you had said previously, and I'll just kind of catch up the audience. So you have a background in big law. You were at
Mhm.
V&E, so Vincent and Elkins, and then King and Spalding, and then you eventually landed as a partner at Denton's. Um, and
With an interlude in-house for 6 years at the Association of American Medical Colleges. Yeah, before I went back to big
and
law.
that was
Yeah.
mostly policy work, regulatory policy work.
Yes,
Okay.
indeed. Regulatory policy work for teaching hospitals and health
Okay.
systems.
Fascinating. And so you were like done with in-house. Let me go back to private practice.
I mean, it wasn't really that awareness
Right.
one day. So I ended up having my children while I was working in-house, and I got very frustrated with how few resources were out there for new parents making the transition from being a working individual to becoming a working parent. And I said to my dear husband, there should be a program out there. There should be a class I can take about how to transition into working parenthood. I can take a class on how to massage my baby. I can take a class on how to puree baby food. I can take a class on how to make a birth plan. I can't take a class on how to navigate the personal and professional identity crisis I'm having as I become a working parent. And Jason said, well, what are you going to do about it? And thus, the program that I created, Mindful Return, was born. And I was working at the trade association full time. It was an intense job, even though it wasn't a firm. And in little tiny bits and pieces of time, I was starting this program, Mindful Return. I started blogging, I started interviewing people. And I also started working with some employers. There were maybe about a dozen employers that I was working with on the side gig, passion project, who were using my program as a parental leave benefit. And after about a year and a half of working full time in my law gig while also the side gig Mindful Return and being mom to a 2-year-old and an infant, I wanted more daylight hours to be able to work on Mindful Return, this program that I was growing. And so perhaps ironically, I left the trade association in-house role to go back to big law, which I will confess was something that I said I would never do. So I've learned a lesson. You should never say that you will never do something
Yeah.
again because circumstances change. And I went into Denton's and I entered as a partner on a 60% schedule. And
Oh.
I was able to work in the other 40% of my professional work week on Mindful Return and growing that platform and working with more and more employers. And so I was very transparent when I applied for the role at Denton's about the fact that I also wanted to be doing this other work, and they were amenable to it. And quite frankly, the healthcare group had a culture of having people on all sorts of different schedules, which was wonderful. And I had seen it modeled for me. And I did that for 6 years,
It's amazing.
sort of splitting the two.
That's wonderful. I'd love to backpedal a little bit and bring this moment that you both shared with me previously about the conversation at the sink. Um, I would love for you guys to kind of recreate that for my audience. And who you guys are. I mean, I think it's a really beautiful thing, and it's a gift for anybody gets to relate with you. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
So we're at the sink. It's the evening. We've put the kids to bed. They're both under the age of 2. We're exhausted because we're sterilizing pump parts. So like Lori she was pumping. There was a series of pump parts at the office, and there was a series of pump parts at home. So she was very lucky that she
Brought them back and forth every day.
Yeah.
Had one pump here, one pump there. All the parts go back and forth, and all the bottles, and it's chaos.
So we're just going through the pump parts. And this is where Lori's just like, there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. There needs to be something out there.
I'm angry. I'm probably crying. Yeah.
And that's when I look at her and I said, all right, so what are you going to do about it? And that kicked off a series of dominoes that, have gone to the moon and back and again. And I think that too often when we think about building something entrepreneurial, it has to be in the garage, it has to be venture funded, it has to be all these things. But it's like, what if you take little bite-sized pieces with mind-numbing detail on a weekly basis and you build something? And sometimes it's like watching grass grow. But what Lori did, and Lori's gift, is her consistency in believing in what she did and continuing to put content out there, share it with people, build those relationships. So yeah, that moment at the sink, it was exhausting. I think we were both sleep
Yeah.
deprived, and like many parents of, well, I mean, let alone one, you go for the second, and then, as an MBA, I came up with the equation 1 + 1 is 85.
That's what it felt like in our house when we
Yes.
added the second kid. Yeah.
Yes. So that was the moment at the sink, and that's where mindful return was really born.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it gave me almost the permission to go upstairs and one day later that week, sit there and write my first blog post. And I was sitting there, my hands were shaking, and nobody ever read this blog. 5 people probably read the post. But initially, it feels very scary to put your own personal story out into the world and the interwebs, and who knows what might happen. But it was sort of that little spark, the permission to go ahead and get started and just to do one tiny little thing per day to advance this goal. Now, 9.5 years later, Mindful Return works with 108 employers, and we have all these classes, and it's great. And it just started with one little blog post and one little conversation.
And when you move that forward, as it was growing, the consumer marketer came out in me. I used to be a brand manager at Unilever on Dove lotions and creams, and there was one point where Lori was starting to build something larger, and she's like, I don't know, what should it look like? And I'm like, you should have a focus group at the house. Invite all your new mom friends over and brainstorm together.
So we did a brunch.
I took the kids to the airport. This is back when DCA allowed you to go and look at the airplanes. Cool. We would go on the shuttle bus. The boys used to love the moving walkways. For us, we go to the airport and everybody's like, where are you going? We're like, nowhere.
We're just going to the airport with our children to have fun at the airport. Yeah.
Yeah. And that gave Lori an opportunity to share some of the things that she was thinking about and get, in consumer marketing language, market validation. And off to the races she was, with a broader set of ambassadors that wanted to see her succeed.
So exciting. And Lori, I couldn't help when I noticed and looked at your website, all the different languages and all the different authors. Anything you care to share about statistics or helping what you're creating for reach?
Yeah, well, one data point that I really am proud to share about our program is in the United States, about 64% of women go back to work after parental leave. And when I hear that number, I think, oh my gosh, huge leaky leadership pipeline. We're losing a third of brilliant people who could be. Anyway, and Mindful Return was created in part to help create better retention and help people feel like they could stay and they could thrive in an organization. And we looked at some data from the first 1,000 people who went through our program, and we tracked them over a 5-year period. And we found that over the 5-year period, 85% of them were still at their same employer. 93% of them were still in the workforce. So that is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. Absolutely, there are people who are just never going to come back after leave. Absolutely, there are people who are absolutely going to come back after leave. And then there's a big swath in the middle who aren't sure if they're going to be able to figure it out or make it work, or they just don't know. And if you can give them the tools and support and community to be able to figure all these things out and work through their anxieties, they'll come back and they will be super loyal to you and very grateful that you helped them through the process. In terms of the international chapters, they've grown completely organically. There's a woman in the UK named Anya Smirnova who heard about Mindful Return from someone at her daycare. Someone at the daycare had taken the program when she was working in New York and then moved back to London and said, hey, have you heard about Mindful Return? We really should have it here. And so Anya reached out and said, can we bring Mindful Return to the UK? And she became the head of the UK chapter. She worked on translating the course into the Queen's English and some British norms and circumstances. And same thing happened in South Africa. We have it in Spanish and Portuguese now. So it's been very organic and something that clearly new parents want to have and want to bring to their own countries and cultures. So I'm super excited about that. I was a public affairs and international relations major when I was in college. So this is sort of a nice, and we met abroad, and we love international things, and we live in an international city. So it's sort of nice to be able to expand in that way too.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love the story. Let's pivot for a moment. I want to come back to some of those topics for both of you, but You guys brought up this interesting book that I think is so fascinating, especially for two driven parents, have desires and ambitions and things like that. It's called Fair Play by Evie
Hmm.
Rodsky.
Eve
Eve
Rodsky.
Rodsky.
Yes.
What is this? And you guys are a facilitator? Do you speak to corporate groups? I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah. So Eve Rodsky was frustrated about this division of labor, the inequalities and the division of labor just culturally and in homes. And she wrote this fantastic book. And then there's also a documentary that you can watch. It's an hour and 15 minutes. You and your partner can sit down together. Jason and I sat down together and we watched Fair Play together. And it's a book, but it's also a deck of cards that you can use. We've
Oh
got a little
my.
deck here. And it's got, I'll just pick one
Okay.
out, let's see. Watching. Oh, magic. That's like a special card. But I'm gonna pull out. Okay, school breaks over the summer. So who's responsible for figuring out who's gonna do what over the school breaks in the summer, right? So the idea is that you take each card and you figure out basically like who's going to be the person who is primarily responsible for the card.
But
And
this, and let me just clarify, this is for married
yeah,
couples or, people who,
two people who live
correct,
together.
and that
Yes.
basically raise a
Mm-hmm.
family and, or I
Yes.
mean, have other responsibilities if they may have furry kids, I mean, different
Yeah.
responsibilities.
Yeah. It could be roommates,
Yes.
right, who need to take care of a space. But the idea is that you keep the conception, planning, and execution of a task all with one
Okay.
person. And what often happens in marriages is one person keeps the mental load in their own head. And so they have the conception and the planning, and then they give the other person things to do. They delegate the things. But there's a disconnect that happens and people get resentful. Anyway, there's a whole like mental load issue. And I've become certified as a fair play facilitator. I do presentations to corporate groups. There's so many dual career working couples
Yep.
these days that this is an issue, and it spills into the workplace too. Because if you're doing 90% of the mental work of your household, you're just not able to focus on your job as much as someone who is doing 10% of the mental work of a household.
And one of the things you can see within couples is sometimes the division of labor is just haphazard.
Not intentional.
It's
Yeah.
not intentional, but as you know, as your kids get older, things get a lot more complicated. So having real ownership over things just makes the week and the month just go a lot more smoother. So that we know who owns what, who's doing what, so that we can do all the things within the family as well as our day jobs. So.
Even before the Fair Play book came out, Jason and I had instituted something that we called the Saturday Basket and the Saturday Meeting, which was a time that he and I just decided we were going to sit down on the couch, hot date every Saturday night, and map out who was on point each day in the coming week if a child were to get sick. Like, that was the initial impetus, because we both had competing demands, whose thing was more important on which day. And we had this basket where we just started putting all of I call it the detritus of life, like all the stuff that just needs to get done. We put it in one place and consolidate the chaos into one spot. So every Saturday night we addressed what was in the basket. We went through the week, we mapped out a bunch of things, and we've been doing that for like close to a decade now.
Yeah, and with the basket, I had read Atul Gawande's checklist manifesto, which he's a doctor in Massachusetts, and he realized that checklists reduces errors in emergency rooms. Are there checklists in other industries? And I was so inspired by this, we created a family checklist so that we would go through, all right, have we done this? Have we thought about this? Do we have a date night on the calendar for next month? All the things, so that we were just more intentional with our Saturday basket. And every once in a while, there'd be a glass of wine with the Saturday basket, so that it made the event, more enjoyable.
Yeah. I feel, I have a lot of things going through my mind every time you guys talk about this subject, which has been only twice now so far. As it relates to my marriage, I'm going to send my wife this recording. She doesn't always listen to my episodes, but she's going to be like, we need that.
Yeah.
Um,
A little bit of planning goes a long
yeah,
way.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and yeah.
So, you guys both authored books and you guys both speak. Can you share a little bit about that? I have some questions around the journey of writing a book. What was that like? Um, and are you going to write any more?
I think our book writing journeys were very
Okay.
different. Mine is called Back to Work After
Okay.
Baby, How to Plan and Navigate a Mindful Return from Maternity Leave. We've got the little baby here,
Nice.
yeah. And I basically started, I'm a writer, I'm a lawyer, I love words, I love writing. It just sort of like comes out of me. And I started blogging for Mindful Return. I started interviewing people for the blog and things like that. And after about a year and a half of consistent blogging, I realized that I had probably already written the book. And so for me, it was basically a weaving together of a lot of things that I wrote over a year and a half into what is now
The
Back to
book.
Work After Baby. I know that was a different journey for Jason.
Yeah, and forgive me. Hold on, Jason. Are you going to write any more, Lori? Are you going to write more books? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now you.
Will they be on this topic?
Okay.
Probably not.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, Jason.
So, unlike Lori, I am not an attorney, and writing, I wouldn't even say is in my core top five. And so,
Nice.
relationships to infinity has always been the idea and the dream, and I've always been fascinated by the following that we say keep in touch, we don't.
Mm,
Why? So every year I'd be on different speaking engagements. People come up to me, Jason, you should write a book. I'd be like, I know, it's called Relationships to Infinity. And I think it was around 2020. We were in virtual school and lockdown, and just all the things were happening. And a journalist at Bloomberg Radio, who I'd done some segments with, she said, listen, Jason, I think you have a book in you. I just wrote mine. Oh, and by the way, I just took this book writing class through Georgetown University's School of
cool.
Continuing Studies. I was like, problem, solution.
And
And
I was like, thank God. I don't have to be the editor. I don't have to try to get him to meet deadlines or anything. No, like,
and,
it was nice to take myself out of it. I mean, I
and
did a lot of editing, but
yes, she did. She did. At the yes, but I think there were a couple of things. There's a lot of emotions around writing a book, and so the class helped you process that. The professor often talks about books are not written, but they're rewritten. So getting the comfort level of drafting and redrafting things. And he also talks about books should be written in community. So I was in a nonprofit writing group, and I had an editor. Okay, Jason, give me my 2,000 words. To get the social science right, I was very lucky.
I think it was more like 20,000 words.
No,
But
but
go
it's
ahead.
2,000 words a week.
Oh, at a
It was-
time.
yeah,
Okay.
so give me my 2,000 words a week, and
Okay.
yes, to get to the minimum 20,000 words. But, to get the social science right, I had reached out to the dean of Georgetown's business school. He had put me in touch with the exec ed dean at Georgetown. And it was great to have that partnership also, in addition to doing executive level interviews, to have someone that, when he heard what I wanted to do, he's like, wow, you're bridging two worlds of people that don't talk. You have the ivory tower of academia that write about networks, and then you have career coaches and counselors and speakers that just give advice, and you're actually going to bring those two worlds together. And so to be able to get that out the door, and I think Lori knew that I was very serious about writing, because I was up on Saturday and Sunday mornings putting my words on page. And
Yeah, here was a guy who during business school I couldn't get out of bed before 1 p.m. and here he was like 6 a.m. pounding the
Good for
keys.
you.
yes.
Wow, this is serious.
Good
Yeah.
for you.
So, and for me, being a social science geek, the fact that Dan Pink blurred my book, I nearly had a heart attack.
That's awesome.
It was great to get out the door, and of course, couldn't have done it without Lori at the end being my copy editor, because she knows my voice and was just super helpful in getting that all together at the end.
So cool. I love the team that you guys make up. There's a lot of complimenting back and forth. It's really neat to see. Um, Let me ask you some questions. I'd love for you to give some advice. So, um, advice around writing a book. So I know you just shared kind of your journey on that with some ideas. If you guys have any other kind of last minute thoughts around should you write a book? If there's a book in you, what should you how should you approach it? And then number two, you guys are both public speakers. So any advice around people who are considering doing that? Um, Lawyers, are required to write and tend to be decent writers, and or I mean litigators are very talkative and can be, and so there's these latent gifts or nascent gifts that could come out. And so what advice would you guys give to my audience around those subjects?
I'll start. Let's start with book and then public speaking. I'd say with respect to the book, I believe everyone has a book in them. That there's really no one whose story that you can't find something about someone's story that would be interesting or that you're passionate about and want to create. I mean, to me, the world is just like a place where any book can contribute to a conversation. That said, it can be a substantial undertaking. So just start writing, right? The only way to get good at writing is just to write and write frequently and write crap and then write better and play around with words and get them out on a page. And I don't know if I have it right here, but I have a writing journal that I now write in 3 times a week. And I have a little chart at the front of it that I made for myself where I literally just have 3 check boxes and it says week 17, 3 check boxes. So during the week, I don't have to have a specific time of day. I don't have to have a specific day of the week that I do it. I just, during the week, want to check off 3 times that I sat down and actually wrote something. So, I mean, my advice to someone who wants to write a book is just start writing about something, about anything, get the juices flowing of writing. In terms of public speaking, I think it's about finding that area that you're passionate about and where you have something unique to say, and find who you want to say it to, right? I mean, for me, the public speaking was a natural outgrowth of the work that I was doing around working parenthood. I was already connected to these employers who wanted to support their working parents through the transition back to work after parental leave. So it made sense that I might come in and speak to subjects that relate to working parenthood. I have had people compliment my ability to speak English and translate things into English from complicated subjects like Medicare reimbursement law and things like that. And so, I try to make it light and enjoyable and entertaining and accessible to audiences, even when it's a hard topic. And I say things are a hard topic, not because they're like rocket science, but getting a male partner at a law firm to feel comfortable talking about breastfeeding is not easy, right? And so we have to bring some levity to this and normalize the conversations.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori.
Just a quick thought on Lori's evolution as a public speaker. I'll never forget when she was at the Association of American Medical Colleges and she needed to give this big talk on graduate.
I was terrified.
Graduate medical education, and it was just like this really big thing. One of the big things I always talk about is in public speaking, bring out yourself. And so Lori on the side, as part of who she is, she plays violin. Cool. She's played in an orchestra. I asked her, can you relate GME, graduate medical education?
It was to talk about healthcare information technology, but
yes.
No matter. Yes.
Yeah. Can you relate it to an orchestra and who's the woodwinds and who's the conductor? And the more she sat with that, we were able to come up with an image that was able to outline that. And I think how many people came up to you afterwards just to talk about their instruments?
I know, it was fun. Yeah, no, creating that analogy is super helpful. You're also reminding me that parenthood made me so much of a better public speaker because before we had kids, I would stew about the slides and I would sit there and analyze them and I'd memorize my script. And then we had kids and I was like, I don't have time for any of that. And I just showed up as who I was and I was much more spontaneous and I hadn't over-prepared anything and people liked that better. And I was like, wow, this is fantastic. So parenthood really helped there.
When I think about public speaking, I think about a talk that I bombed in 7th grade. I was supposed to give a 3-minute talk on baseball cards in 7th grade. And I was a massive baseball card collector. I knew all the things. I knew all the stats. I knew all the different sets. I got up there and froze. And at that moment, I promised myself that whatever was freezing me up would not happen again. In college, I ran for student government. And by the end of my sophomore year, I was president of the student government. All through public speaking. And then I got into larger style speaking, convocation addresses, university-wide addresses, things that were totally outside of my comfort zone. And so I went to my public speaking professor, Dr. William Kushner. I said, Dr. Kushner, I don't know what I'm doing. He's like, come to my office. Wrote the speech, practiced it together. He would sit in the audience and he would give me feedback. And so I had a speechwriter and a speech coach in college. that allowed for me to come up with my speaking voice. And to this day, I still hear his, Jason, a half pause and a comma, full pause and a period, and watch the schmaltz. Yeah, sometimes I would, get a little too exuberant. So, and I keep coming back to, when it comes to speaking, just get up there and be yourself and give what you want to give at that moment in time. And here's the thing, every incremental talk, you'll get better because you're up there.
It's like writing. The only way to get better at public speaking is to public speak. The only way to get better at writing is to just sit down and write.
So, so putting yourself out there in your local city groups, putting yourself out there in those local professional associations, raising your hand, if you're an attorney within a practice group, to be able to say, listen, do that presentation. If you're in-house, to give a talk on a particular thing. If you go to a conference, come back and volunteer to give the recap. The more that you're in the act of pushing yourself into public speaking, the more you will find your authentic and true voice in that.
I just want to appreciate how authentic you both are. And it's just, there's a lot of ownership here. Have you guys always been that way? Or sounds like it's been a journey?
I mean, I think you only ever got us. We have evolved over the years. I'm thinking back to our ketubah, or the wedding contract that we had, that says, we promise not just to love the person we're marrying, but the people who that person will become. And I feel like that's been sort of the spirit of our marriage, is understanding that we're not the same people we were 15 years ago. And heck, we're not going to be the same people next year that we are today. So just sort of have to roll with that.
Yeah, I think there's a level of psychological safety that allows for us to just be ourselves, that we both take a deep breath, and that we understand what we're trying to communicate, and that we're just trying to listen and hear each other out, even when there is a misunderstanding. But to treat ourselves with care, and that allows for each other to treat each other with care.
Well, I think I could go on for hours with you two. This is just so much fun, and I really appreciate that psychological safety you've created in this space. And I hope people who have heard your message will either pursue the books and check out your websites, all which are in the show notes, the links and everything for them to find. So both Lori and Jason, what are the best ways for people to reach you, find you, reach out?
Sure. You can find everything about my work at mindfulreturn.com and on the usual social media channels at Mindful Return. I do a Tuesday tip for working parents on Instagram that you can find me on every week. If you heard this podcast, you can also feel free to link in with me and say that you listened to this podcast, Lori Mihalich-Levin. And if you want to get more of this duo, Jason and I co-host a podcast called Parents at Work that you can find on all the places one finds podcasts. Over to you, Jason.
Sure. So my website is readysetlaunch.net, where you can find all the work that I do, speaking, training, and coaching. Like Lori, I'm on LinkedIn, just Jason Levin, and I'm on Instagram at Ready Set Launch LLC. If you do go on my website, I do have a monthly newsletter that gives you authentic and tactical approaches to keeping in touch. So we say keep in touch, but everybody has an opportunity to be authentic about how we keep in touch on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis.
Wonderful. Lori and Jason, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Chris. It's
Thank
been
you, Chris.
Super fun, and we appreciate that you're willing to take the duo of us here.
Appreciate you, Chris.
It's been fun. It's been a blast.